All right, so it is 6:32, and I don't want to keep Sam waiting here. So I think we can just get started, and as people as you continue the presentation, people can join the call. So hi everyone. Today we have I believe our fourth Devfest event. My name's Hussein. I'm a community co-lead here at McMaster University at Google Development Student Club in McMaster University, and we also have Jacob here. Jacob, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure, I just have a small intro. Hi, everybody. My name is Jacob Cardoso. I'm also a member of the GDE, and I'm on the community team this year.
Perfect. And today we have Sam. Sam is a Google development expert and a freelancer engineer who's focusing on the front end tech and frameworks such as Angular. It is now his fourth year as a Google developer expert, and he has been mainly focusing on Angular for the last 7 years. And so Sam is here today to give you a talk on Angular and the best practices with Angular. So now I'll just pass it on to Sam, if you want to take it away.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining my talk about Angular best practices. If I can just get a quick thumbs up if the sound's good, if the video is good. All right, thank you. So also thank you very much, of course, to the organization of the Google Developer Student Club there at McMaster University. I just want to say that Devfests are wonderful events. And why? Because, yeah, it's all about joining each other to learn about all technical things. So before I start, just want to say that it's quite late here in Belgium now, so apologies if I might have a slight sleepy look on my face. But anyway, if you have any questions, please write them down for after the session, and I will be happy to help you where I can. So let's start with what it actually means, right? What is a best practice? And to get an idea, let's quote some definitions that I took from the internet. Well, a best practice is a solution to a problem that has organically grown over years of trial and error. Another one is that over time, it also became a generally accepted solution that is proven to be superior to known alternatives. And thankfully, they are also typically maintained and described by governing bodies. And that means that best practices do not pop up out of thin air. They start with small guidelines, and they evolve. They become better over time based on feedback of its user base. And this also means that best practices are constantly being challenged, not only by their adopters, but also by other best practices and methodologies. Comparing them is typically done through benchmarking or market research. And a good example of such a best practice is the WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And they represent the globally recognized accessibility best practices or standards on the internet and are maintained by the W3C, which is in this case the governing body. So how do best practices apply to Angular? Well, Angular obviously also has its best practices, and it's one of the key strengths of the framework, actually. It's the opinionated nature of Angular that provides the base for being able to follow and even enforce standards and best practices. And today we will not be looking into ways on how to organize our code or our project architecture. And we will not focus on which state management system to use, and not even on the current actual debates, like, for example, signals versus observables. But today we will talk more about the foundational basics and important parts that span across any kind of architectural setup or organization of any Angular project. So let's take a look at some of the best practices that are part of the success of Angular. But before we continue, very short, who am I? My name is Sam, and I've been playing with the web as a software engineer for more than 15 years now. My sole focus has always been on the development of the internet. And that focused experience brought me to my current position as a front-end architect at Core Financial. Core is a promising fintech startup that started in the US, but is already expanding worldwide today. I also serve as a GDE, which is short for Google Developers Expert. And that means that I do work in support of the Angular and web communities by organizing, presenting, writing, and mentoring other developers. And last but definitely not least, together with my partner Zoe, We manage a household of 4, including 2 hyperactive, exhausting boys called Milo and Max. If you want to learn more about me, please check out my website. To end my introduction, just a little bit on my other company, well, my own company, basically Innovatus, that I'm running together with Jurgen van der Moere since 2016. With Innovatus, we mainly work around initiatives in the community of Angular developers, like, for example, the Angular Belgium meetup group and the yearly NGBE conference. Through our initiatives over the years, we have facilitated training in Angular and other related web technologies for thousands of engineers in and around Belgium. And of course, we cannot do that alone. We have the help of some amazing people, which you can see some of them in the picture here. So these are the 3 best practices I would like to cover today: staying up to date, handling security, and creating accessible applications. Let's start with staying up to date. Staying up to date is sometimes the most easy best practice, but potentially also the hardest, as updating your project dependencies might be very tricky. For example, because of third-party libraries that need to follow the upgrade path of Angular first. They need to publish a new version before they can be upgraded. And even worse, sometimes maintainers abandon libraries or they temporarily lose focus. And with Angular moving so fast by publishing a new version each 6 months, breaking changes might occur every year. So this requires maintainers of libraries to keep focus and always follow the Angular release. So let me start with a hot take. In general, I recommend to avoid third-party libraries for Angular. And by that, I don't mean all of them, obviously, but especially the ones that are simple wrapper libraries around other JavaScript libraries. Like, for example, ng QR code is just a basic wrapper around the QR code package. And it does not much more than just expose a component and a directive that pass through the configuration for QR code. So then why not just use QR code package and wrap it yourself if it's needed? Why? It will make you stay in full control of the upgrade part of this dependency. And just to be clear, in general, I don't dislike wrapping non-Angular libraries with Angular components. And I definitely do not want to attack the work of the maintainers of those kind of packages. It works for some, and it provides convenience for projects that do not care too much about keeping full control. And sometimes it can also help you with fast prototyping, or it can give you a good example on how to wrap that package yourself in a component or in a module or whatever. But if you do so, if you use those packages as inspiration, please give credit where the credit is due. So the general advice as a best practice here is to make sure that you can keep upgrading your Angular dependencies timely. And if you cannot follow immediately because of, for example, a lot of third-party dependencies, Angular probably has you covered. Well, at least if you are using a long-term support version. Why? Because important security releases will be patched on each of those major versions that are in the long-term support. And currently that's version 15 to 17, because version 17 was just recently released last week. So version 14 will already get kicked out of long-term support pretty soon. So just to give you an idea, that gives you, and of course the maintainers of other third-party libraries that you might use, about 1 to 1.5 years for making sure that upgrades are done timely. So how can you keep your project dependencies up to date? Well, there are, let me hide this thing here, just a sec. Hide, oh, that's better. Sorry, I didn't notice that yet. So to come back, yeah. How can you keep your project dependencies up to date? Well, there are various ways to do that. And let's consider the Node Package Manager as an example, so NPM. And keep in mind that there are most probably similar tools available for Yarn or PNPM, which are just other package managers. So if you want to focus on updating your Angular dependencies, you can use ng update through the Angular CLI. And if you use NX and you want to upgrade or migrate your NX project to the latest NX dependencies, you can use NX migrate latest. But those two commands, however, they only focus on the Angular or NX related dependencies. So let's take it a step further. If you want to list all your current dependencies and their current, wanted, and latest version available, you can use the npm outdated command. And if you just want to go and update your dependencies altogether, use the npm update command. So here we see an example of the output of the npm outdated command. Basically, all your dependencies are listed with the current, the wanted, and the latest version. The wanted version is a version that matches with the latest version within your version definition in the package.json file. And I understand that that might sound a little bit difficult, but it also is a little bit difficult, because to fully understand that, you need to consider semantic versioning. And in this case, a tilde will match with the latest available patch, and a caret matches the latest minor upgrade. So to conclude this slide, the latest column that you see is the very latest version available of a specific dependency. Of course, we also have the Angular update guide available, and you can use this guide to get an initial idea of the work that you would need to do to upgrade between two major versions. Obviously, each project is unique, so the instructions that are given here are just to give you a head start. Staying up to date, of course, with all those changing features in the framework lately can also be very challenging. But Angular, and even to a more extent NX, has got us covered through automatic migrations. We already had automatic migrations for RxJS in the past, and even for migrating from modules to standalone components. And now with the upcoming, it's there for you to try it out, the new control flow syntax, you will also be able to use auto migrations for the bigger part of your code base. And if you have a very big project, obviously it will not cover 100%. You always might have some parts that fall out of it, but you can always fix those manually. And I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty cool that Angular exposes for us methods that allows us to automatically upgrade our code base. That's pretty amazing. So the next best practice is related to security. And Angular has built-in security protection against the most common vulnerabilities. For example, to protect against attack factors such as cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery. And one of the best ways to stay secure is by keeping up to date with your dependencies. But we got that covered already. So let's take a deeper look into how Angular protects us against the most common attacks by applying some security best practices. So XSS, or cross-site scripting, is one of the most common attacks on the web. And this basically happens when attackers are able to execute injected codes on your applications. So Angular treats all values as untrusted by default and sanitizes them when they are injected into the DOM or executed as part of your JavaScript. So if there is an attack on your application, it most probably means that the developer explicitly made it possible. So if you do need to inject content, such as HTML or CSS or JavaScript directly, you can use the DOM sanitizer. That's a helper class that you can inject, which is provided by Angular. But be sure to only do this if you are 100% sure. Well, you probably cannot be 100% sure, but let's say 99% sure that you are protected against those cross-site scripting attacks through a different mechanism. For example, you have checks in place to escape any content before it gets injected into your database and returned to your browser. And by content, I mean, for example, user-generated content. Content where a hacker can try to inject some JavaScript. So Whenever you have those situations, you can use libraries such as DOM Purify or Sanitize HTML to do the heavy lifting of sanitizing for you. And sorry, each modern framework in the backend space most likely has a package available to handle the sanitizing for you. And of course, always let a peer review your code or do pair programming on these critical parts of your applications. There are plenty of other and more detailed ways to protect yourself against these kinds of attacks, like, for example, content security policy and trusted types. But I'm not going to touch those topics because they are very detailed topics and they are very hard to explain in a few minutes. So on another spectrum, we have two HTTP level vulnerabilities for which Angular also has built-in prevention mechanisms. One is cross-site request forgery, and the other one is cross-site script inclusion. Sorry. But today, I will focus primarily on the cross-site request forgery, as cross-site script inclusion became irrelevant when Angular dropped support for non-modern browsers like Internet Explorers. And yeah, I think that the attendees are students, so most probably they have not ever used Internet Explorer 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever browser, very old browser. So that's a good thing, right? You don't need to care too much about it because the modern browsers, they made that attack a lot harder by applying the same origin policies by default. So cross-site request forgery, however, is still very relevant on the internet, but it can be easily mitigated by sending a nonce from the server in a cookie to the client and back to the server on request headers. And that value has to be the same, or the request can be ignored. The backend can then decide, okay, this looks like some malicious attempt, something is wrong, I'm just gonna ignore it, I'm not gonna do anything without it, and the user can retry to do it. And this mitigation also works because of the same origin policies. Other domains cannot read out the cookie. And although this is mostly a server-side technique, Angular has built-in support for the client-side part as well. So to do that, just use the with XSRF configuration function to configure the HTTP client during bootstrap of your application. And if really needed, you can even provide your own cookie and header names if you wish to override the default ones. And this is an interesting one. If you do find a bug that's related to the framework directly, especially security bugs, you might get yourself a nice bonus, because Angular is part of the Google open source software vulnerability reward program. So if you believe to have found a security issue, be sure to report it. There's a lot to be said about accessibility on the web. And that's immediately the third big topic, big best practice. And obviously, for Angular, accessibility is not much different compared to other web frameworks or any kind of application on the web. But there are specific things to consider when improving the accessibility of your Angular applications. The first thing that you can do is elevate your applications with ARIA attributes. And I'm not going to go over the entire specification of ARIA and its potential, but I will give you a few examples. Like ARIA Live is an attribute that you can use to indicate to screen readers that whatever is in this block is likely to change over time or because of user interaction. So whenever the user is idle, it will speak out the changes that occurred in that block. And in this example, the toasts wrapper contains a list of toasts that might change because of user interaction. So for example, when a form is validated, it might give you toast, hey, there's some error in this form, can you please check it? And then a screen reader or any other assistive software will pick that up and it will read it out loud to, for example, a blind user using your application. Then another, perhaps more well-known example is the ARIA label. And as you can see on the right side example, the button has no textual content, right? There's only an SVG representing, for example, a cross, right? To indicate that this button is used to close something. A screen reader obviously cannot interpret the SVG, so the ARIA label indicates the full meaning of this button in text. So in Angular, it's important to use the @attr dot prefix when you want to bind dynamic values to ARIA attributes. And obviously, you only need to do this if you have dynamic values, right? In all other cases, you can use the ARIA label attribute without the prefix. And in this simplified example of a form validation, we dynamically add the ARIA described by attribute if there's an error on the input validation. And the null in the ternary operator that you see there indicates that the attribute should be removed completely if there is no error. And just as in the previous example, we also have the ARIA live property here because the content of the div can change after user interaction when the form is validated. And if you want even more control beyond HTML markup in your application code to announce those updates, you can also use the live announcer, which is provided by the Angular CDK. And the live announcer uses similar techniques as with the ARIA live attribute, but it will handle all of that magic for you underneath. So in this case, you only need to call the API to make sure the API of the live announcer dependency to make sure that the screen reader reads your messages out loud. Then another very important implementation error that I've seen multiple times when consulting on projects is that developers try to reinvent the wheel. And those reinventions are mostly typically around buttons. So to make this advice general, as a best practice, you should avoid creating your own elements if the native elements are already handling a lot of the hard accessibility work for you in the browser. So for example, if you wish to improve native elements or augment their behavior, improve their standard behavior, you should use an Angular directive instead of your own components. And if you want to see very good examples of this best practice, you can go into the Angular material project, where, for example, the material button or the table components are developed by the Angular team. And it's a very good example on how to do it. Then another hidden gem in the Angular router package is the ARIA current when active directive. And although it's clearly documented, I've not seen much usage of it before. So in the example shown on the left, I've used it to indicate that the navigation links are representing the current page when they are active. And in the other example, we can indicate which step is currently active when going through a step-by-step process. So do not be confused by these examples as they all have the ARIA current when active. This is just a Angular directive that will set the ARIA current label as soon as you are on that page. Then the next tip is about focusing on navigation. So as a developer, you should decide where focus goes after a page navigation, especially because we are in a single page application with Angular. And to achieve that, you can simply use the navigation event of the router to reclaim or update the focus. And the goal of this technique is to avoid that focus comes back on the first element of the body again. And by doing that, you make sure that the loaded content in the specific for that specific page is usable right away. And to stay in the context of focus, another one of my favorites is trapping focus. So With this simple CDK trap focus directive, also exposed by the Angular CDK library, it's very easy to keep focus bound to the context. Like, for example, when you open a dialog or when you have some detail fly out, you want to make sure that the user stays in that context. And if you even want more control, the Angular CDK also exposes directives to specifically mark the end and the start of a focus region and to specify which element should receive the initial focus. If you want to learn more about all of these techniques, or if you do not trust me or whatever, you can always check out the Google Code Labs. And if you go to, just Google it, Google for Code Labs. There's a dedicated lab that focuses on accessibility in Angular applications. And there are several more related to Angular. And obviously, there are plenty more code labs related to any kind of Google technology that will help you boost your technical skills. So if you want to read more on all of these topics, I'll have the full list of all the resources that I used setting up this presentation available. And when I will share the slides with the organization, I will make sure to include a page with all of those links. So that was a lot of information, perhaps high level, perhaps already very advanced information to digest in such a short period of time. But let's wrap up and conclude with the fact that a major framework like Angular follows best practices. And Angular also gives us the tools to apply general web development best practices in our projects. And following these best practices is not only the base for developing modern applications for our customers and users, but it also allows us to maintain and make sure that our applications stay secure while they grow over the years. Then accessibility. Accessibility is a big part of developing Angular applications as well. But luckily, there's not much to it for Angular specifically. I want to make sure that I stress that for Angular specifically, because there is a lot to it in general. But we can use the same techniques that apply to any kind of web project in general. So thanks a lot for your attention. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you very much, Sam, for that lovely presentation. And yeah, just as Sam said, if you have any questions, please, you can just put them in the chat or you can unmute your mic. To start off, I actually had a question. For someone who's like starting off with Angular, just getting into it, which one of the three would you say is the most important practice to focus on, like the staying up to date or the security? Yeah.
I think the best practices part, because if you're just starting with Angular, it probably means that you get started in a team of perhaps more other experienced developers, and they will handle the dependency upgrades, right? So if you can focus on accessibility as a first step, that will be very good, because even those things are not Angular specific, right? So you will learn stuff that you will be able to carry over to other projects or to other technologies that you might use to build web applications. So I think accessibility will give you the most value for your technical skills. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions?
I see a question in the chat.
Yeah. Do you want to read it out or?
Yeah. So the question is, when developing your applications, how do you go about implementing best practices? Do you code with them in mind, or do you review your code after implementation? Also, is it something that changes with updates and that you have to keep up with, or is it something general? So there are different, there are a lot of tools available to help you with that. One of them is, for example, ESLint. and ESLint has rules set up to make sure that you follow accessibility best practices. If you read the documentation, for example, to use the DOM sanitizer to potentially inject unsafe content into your application, it will show you a big red warning that you need to be careful with this. So yeah, there are tools available, there's documentation available to help you out. And is it something that changes with updates? Well, the basics are just a given, right? The basics of accessibility and of security have been well documented over the years. They are not changing that much. But if, for example, a very specific bug would get into Angular, then the Angular team will fix it, and they will release a fix on the long-term supported versions. So currently version 15, 16, and 17. So best to upgrade. If you can, upgrade. Because by upgrading, you get all the latest fixes, you get all the latest features, and you make sure that you are that you stay secure.
Perfect. I hope that answered his question. If there are no other questions, I think we can end it here. I know as you said, it's kind of late where you are, so I don't want to delay you any longer than you
Oh,
need
that's
to be
okay.
delayed.
That's okay.
But yeah, I think we can end it here. Thank you very much, Sam, for coming out and having this talk.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you for the organization. See you next time.
No problem. See you
Bye,
later.
everybody.
Bye.